Hi, this is Friar Tim with part 2 of the series on Franciscan spirituality. Today's topic is, from a Franciscan perspective, what we would call fraternity or universal relationships. If you notice the OFM of on the title after mine and Friar Bill's names signifies Order of Friars Minor. We talked about minority, minoritas, last week. I think that's a little bit of a tougher sell in our consumer materialistic culture. But today we'll talk about fraternity / relationships. We use fraternity from the male friar brother perspective, but it does talk about the whole question of a wider and bigger notion of relationship with other people. I think in many ways, this is vitally important for any number of reasons. One is that most scholars would suggest that we are among the loneliest of generations and the loneliest of peoples at the moment. The Surgeon General of the United States has recently declared an epidemic of loneliness, and some European governments have actually created government departments to work on the whole question of loneliness. Particularly, students of younger people will point out that while younger people are the most digitally connected across a broad spectrum, when it really comes to real-life human beings in whom they trust and with whom they have a solid relationship, our younger people are among the loneliest generation that has ever existed since social psychology has begun to study the problem. In addition, let's be honest, COVID taught us unconsciously that other people are threats and the enemy, and many of us have not consciously gotten beyond that, which is certainly, in my opinion at least, a contributing factor to the great polarizing stuff that we have going on in our politics. So let's discuss the whole Franciscan notion of fraternity or universal relationship. And to accompany us, another image of St. Francis. My apologies for the first video in which I neglected to hit share on Zoom. So I will rectify that today. And here is what we're sharing. Let me move that over. This is the one from last week, which is the oldest image of St. Francis. It dates to the year 1223, frescoed while Francis was still alive. If you notice in the upper left-hand corner, it says FR, Friar, instead of Saint or Blessed, Franciscus in the upper right-hand corner. Francis also does not appear with the stigmata. This is likely somewhat of a lifelike image of Francis. It can be found in the Shrine Church of the Sacred Cave of St. Benedict in Subiaco, Italy. To accompany this talk on fraternity, this famous fresco by Cimabue, which dates from approximately 1280 AD, it's found in the lower Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, and it is executed from the memory of the early friars who knew Francis. So again, it might have some level of real similarity to the saint himself. Now, with that, with Francis accompanying us, let's talk a little bit about relationship. Francis, in his testament, issued a very important statement when talking about his own journey of faith. He used the phrasing, "The Lord gave me brothers." And this is an important key to understand Franciscan relationship. Relationship is seen from a Franciscan perspective as a gift from God. It's gift, it's gratuitous, it's done out of love. So the people in our lives are viewed really as gifts to us. We don't earn them, we don't own them, we don't control them, we don't patronize them. They are, in fact, gifts from God to us. And they are gifts from God to us out of the provident, loving nature of God. Now, the other really interesting thing from a Franciscan perspective is the God who gifts us with relationship is, in effect, relationship. Our God is a Trinitarian God. And by a Trinitarian God, the very essence of God is, in fact, relationship. So therefore, the way in which we relate with other people in love and communion is a direct reflection upon the God who is relationship in and of God's very self. Also, an interesting side note that we'll come back to in a later talk, that when Francis speaks of God as Trinity, he always uses the phrasing 3 and 1. More traditionally, we talk about God 1 and 3, particularly in a Thomistic perspective, but Francis is very clear to talk about 3 and 1. So talking about the relational aspect of God in an implicit way, much, much more than the unity aspect of God. When Francis invites us to be in relationship with other people, he uses the phrasing of familial spirit, that we should have a familial spirit with one another. Let's not get to the point of saying that we're all family, because we really aren't all family, but there should be some level of familiarity one with another, that our relationships should go beyond as much as possible merely kind of superficial, hello, hi, how you doing, but should demonstrate some real interest in other people, some real knowledge of other people, some real appreciation of who other people are, with the corresponding willingness to share enough of ourselves with other people so that between us there can really be a familial type of relationship. Francis also frequently uses the phrasing that in our relationships, we should have a maternal tenderness. Now, it's an interesting point. In one of his other writings, talking about hermitages, that is, places where the friars would withdraw for weeks or months or years at a time to be more absorbed in prayer, Francis said that all of the brothers there were to be brothers one to another, but they should take turns at certain intervals becoming, quote unquote, the mother to the others. In other words, take turns being in charge out of a whole community of brothers, of equals, of like-minded people, and simply take turns being in charge. And being in charge doesn't mean rotating in and out of a dictatorship, but it means rotating in and out of an attitude of service, an attitude of governance, an attitude of caring for other people from a maternal perspective, not necessarily from a more paternal perspective of expecting other people to measure up to things. It's a very, very interesting point that Francis talks about, that our relationships with people, and again, he's talking to an all-male brotherhood here, our relationship with other people should have more of a maternal tint than a paternal tint. They should expect and they should express mercy. That is, kindness towards other people. That is, forgiveness towards other people. That is, accepting other people as who they are, as opposed to demanding that other people measure up. And accepting people's faults, failings, inconsistencies, incoherencies, and accepting that lovingly and helping people to grow together, which involves a certain level of mutual respect and a certain level of mutual joy, one with the other. And of course, if we're talking about this maternal spirit of taking turns, being in charge and governing, this has to express itself with service to others who are needy. Now, it's a fascinating piece in Francis that he views relationship in a very universal term. And let me give you three clear examples of that from the life of Francis. The first, Francis was a part of a crusade who went to Egypt. But Francis did not go to Egypt as a chaplain to the Crusaders. He did not go to Egypt as an advocate to the Crusaders to buckle up and conquer the Holy Land. It's debated whether he even went to Egypt on crusade to, quote unquote, convert the Sultan. But what he did do was, and this is attested in both Islamic and in Christian sources, he went through both lines of battle and stayed with the Sultan and conversed with him. And in conversing with him, simply exhibited a level of brotherhood, a level of relationship, a level of respect to the quote-unquote other. In his earlier rule, Francis gives the basis of Franciscan ministry among the quote-unquote Saracens and other infidels or unbelievers, unquote. And he says that when the friars go among such people, they go in two ways. The first is they go among them and live among them in charity and courtesy and gentleness and exhibit the proper virtues of relationship, particularly relationship with whoever one considers other. And then the second way is if they deem the moment correct and opportune, then they preach the gospel. This is the basis of the quote that is attributed wrongly to St. Francis that you see on bumper stickers and you see on some posters, that is, preach the gospel, use words as necessary. Because for Francis, preaching the gospel first starts with being in right and gentle and Christian relationship with other people. Second point, And one of the legends describing the hagiographies of the early friars, Francis comes to visit an isolated friary in the midst of a forest. And the brothers relate to him that they had just locked the doors of the friary and scattered out some robbers who had come to rob them. And Francis, horrified, went out in the woods in search of the robbers to ask their forgiveness and to offer them shelter and to offer them food from the friary. Here, even when people do us wrong or are potentially threatening to us, that does not obviate, that does not destroy, that does not reject the fact that they are our sisters and brothers with whom we are still in relationship. And that does not wreck the very fact that they are children of God who perhaps have erred and sinned, but their erring and sinning does not separate them definitively from us. And here comes the question of forgiveness and pardon and reconciliation as an essential piece of relationship. Finally, and probably the most important all the way across the board, or the thing that comes down to us, in his famous Canticle of the Creatures, whose anniversary we will be celebrating in these years, the 800th anniversary of it, Francis calls the sun his brother and Mother Earth his sister, and relates to all of creation from this same familial spirit. Now, again, imagine if we truly looked at all of creation as being our brother and sister, a creation that we are called to govern in the best sense of the word, which is to care for, be a steward for, be careful with, and preserve, instead of exploitation. When we begin to shift back to the whole question of minoritas, when we begin to shift our mindset away from power and domination and control and pass it much more onto the whole question of relationship and connection one to another, it effects a huge spiritual conversion on us. So, back to me and the screen. I'd like to leave you with 3 concrete suggestions for fostering relationship in your life. The first is pay much more attention to what social psychologists call micro contacts or micro relationships. The people that we see and encounter who do us some service, the shuttle bus driver, the barista that hands us our coffee, the checkout person at the supermarket, the person who rings up some purchase that we've done somewhere, the UPS delivery guy, etc., etc. It becomes so vitally important that we take just the simple attitude of recognizing that these people who do us these small services are, in fact, human beings who are our sisters and brothers with whom we are in some small relationship. So greeting them, smiling at them, engaging in some small talk, asking how their day is going, how much longer they have to work, thanking them for what they do, is an incredibly humanizing gesture to people who are working very hard. And at the same time, the way in which God has made us, we get a little bit of a jolt in our emotional system of all of the positive hormones that we need, because we simply are taking this time to recognize another human being. Second concrete suggestion. Virtually all of us have people that we've lost contact with, or people that have kind of drifted away, or people that we just simply no longer have the occasion to be with. As I'm saying this, I suspect those of you who are listening, there's a face and a voice that is coming to mind. Take this opportunity to reach out to them. Take this opportunity that God has brought these people to memory as a way in which to exercise the muscle of universal relationship all the more. Text, phone, in person, whatever works, but reach out to someone from whom you have somehow drifted in some way over the course of these weeks, months, or perhaps years. The third suggestion is things like Zoom, which I'm using now, things like FaceTime, which I use regularly, things like WhatsApp or Viber that I use to keep in contact with friends overseas, are tremendous gifts to us because they do allow us to stay in communication with people. However, looking at a screen is qualitatively different than face-to-face interactions with someone. It does not even have the same hormonal effect on us because our brains do not recognize that the image on the screen is an actual human being. Our brain recognizes it as an image on a screen. So whenever possible, prioritize face-to-face contacts with people, face-to-face interactions with people, face-to-face gathering with people whenever possible. There's a very interesting understanding that Catholic sacraments, that is, the presence and the action of Jesus Christ in his community, can only take place in face-to-face events. The sacrament of reconciliation cannot be celebrated via FaceTime or telephone. The sacrament of Eucharist cannot be fully celebrated via Zoom or any kind of video presentation. We can participate in it, but we certainly cannot receive the grace that comes from actual participation in the Eucharist, actual eating of the bread of life and drinking of the cup of salvation, and the strengthening that comes from other people. Zoom celebrations beat a blank in the whole terrible first months of COVID. They kept us somewhat connected, but it's a simulacrum. It's not quite the real thing. So as we reflect upon our relationships here, let's give a deeper level of commitment to being with other people universally. No matter how othered they might be, no matter how much they might have offended us, or no matter how much we would prefer to control or dominate them, universal relationship is a sign of our loving relationship with a God who is, in effect, relationship. Thank you very much, and see you next week.